All right, chapter 4-1, we're going to be talking about the distributive property. And the distributive property, to distribute, means to share whatever's outside of the parentheses with whatever's inside. And anytime you have a number right next to a parenthesis, it means multiplication. So if we distribute this 6 to the 80, it means we multiply 6 times 80. Now, the first time I do it, I told you this already, the first time I do it, I'm going to write it out the long way. After that, I won't ever do it that way again. I'll do it what I think is the shorter, easier way, but I at least want to show you both ways. So 6 times 80 literally means 6 times 80, okay, plus 6 times 1, okay? That's what distributing the 6 means. It means we're multiplying it by the 80, then we're multiplying it by the 1. 6 times 80 is 480. And 6 times 1 is positive 6 and positive 1, so it's positive 6. And then it says to go ahead and evaluate the expression, which means simplify it as much as you can. That's what evaluate means. So we can add 480 and 6, and we get 486. And that is its most simplified method or term possible. In chapter 4, we're going to be talking about expressions and equations. Does anybody know what the difference is? What's an equation have that an expression does not? Anybody want to take a guess? No. Yeah, an equation has an equal sign. You're actually solving for the variable, right? If it has an equal sign, you're actually solving for something. If it's an expression, it's just kind of like a math statement. It's not really a math problem. It's just a statement, and you get it as simplified as possible, but you're not actually solving for a variable. When we introduce the equal sign, then we're moving stuff around and we're getting the variable by itself, and we're actually solving to know what D equals. With an expression, we're just simplifying as much as possible, okay? You don't have to put number 2 in your notes. I just want to do another one really quickly just to show you, and I'm not going to do it with this step right here, okay? This is not needed as far as I'm concerned. If it helps you, do it. If you don't need it, don't do it, okay? So I'm going to do it kind of the more simplified way that I like to do it, which is take 7 times 70. I always like to connect them with an arc to kind of connect in my brain what I'm doing. Positive 7 times positive 70 is positive 490. And then I take 7 times negative 4. Positive 7 times negative 4 is negative 28. Honestly, I'd say the challenge of this section, if I was going to really kind of put my finger on one, is keeping track of your multiplication rules. Something outside exciting happening? Everybody's ducking down. Keeping your multiplication rules straight. When you're multiplying 2 negatives or 2 positives, your answer is positive. When you're multiplying a positive and a negative, you get a negative. Then you got to switch your brain to addition and subtraction rules, and then because then you've got to simplify the next step. So here we've got 490 minus 28, which is 462. And that's your final answer, because that is as simplified as you can get, okay? So keeping straight, the first step, you're multiplying. So you got to keep your multiplying rules straight. Then you switch gears and you are adding and subtracting at the very end. And so then you got to keep your adding and subtracting rules straight about, you know, if you subtract the same sign, you add them and take the sign of the whole problem. If you have opposite signs, you subtract the 2 numbers and you take the sign of the biggest. So keeping those 2 rules straight is going to help you a ton. All right, the next example that I want to do is this one right here. All right, so first thing is we have to distribute, okay? And so, and the reason they put parentheses around that outside -7 is because without the parentheses, it would almost look like -7. And so they wanted you to know that you were still supposed to distribute, okay? So the first step is -7 times a positive 100, which is -700. The next step is a -7 times a -3. Were you raising your hand to tell me the answer?
Yeah.
What is it?
21.
Positive, yeah. A -7 times a -3 is a positive 21. So now we've got our multiplication step done. Now we got to flip gears and we got to think subtraction and addition. We've got -700 and a positive 21. So between those two, the 700 is a bigger number. So we know our answer is going to carry the negative sign because the 700 is the bigger number. So that sign is going to kind of dominate your answer. But because the signs don't match, we have to subtract and we get 679. I did that in my head. Check me. 679. And that's our final answer. So step 1, multiply, following multiplication rules. Step 2, combine if possible or simplify if possible. And here it's possible because they're both just constant numbers. There's no variables here. All right. Are we pretty good with distribution? I feel like I don't need to do a ton of these. It doesn't matter if your terms on the, like here, I mean, I'm not going to work this one, but you still take 4 times 300. Then you take 4 times 6. Everything's positive. So your answer is going to end up positive. Okay. Are we good with that? We feel okay with that. All right. I actually think this next part is easier because I'll show you here in a second why, but you don't have to end up adding at the end. So I'll show you what I mean. So let's look at number 13 here to give you a second to get it written down in your notes. So we do it the same way. We take 7 times y, which is simply 7y. And then we take 7 times 11, it's positive and positive, so it's going to give you a positive 77. And this is why I said I think this bottom half is actually easier because you can't combine a y and a constant because they're not like terms. So you're done. Okay, if you use number 14 as an example here, same steps, -6 times positive t is -6t. And then -6 times -1, negative and a negative goes positive, so it's +6. And again, we've got a t and one without a t, so we can't combine them, so that's just your answer. Yes?
Would it just be t?
If you had what?
On the top, you have to answer it, but the answer would be t, just t, right? Since it's -6 + 6.
No, you can't. No, because you can't combine these at all because you have to. You have a t and then you have a number that doesn't have a t with it. The only way that you could combine those together is if they both had a t on them. Does that make sense? So like it's cats and dogs. You know, they're all animals. This is all math. But if I said, how many cats do you have? It's one thing. How many dogs do you have is another, but you can't combine them. Make sense? Okay. Let's see. What about one like, we just did one like that. So I think we're good there. I'm looking for something specific here. Yeah, this one. -32 minus s in the parentheses, all times a -9. So go ahead and write that down in your notes. All right, so step 1, do your arcs. Take your 9 times your first term, and it's -9 times -32, which is going to give me a positive 288, because a negative times a negative goes positive. And then when I take -9 times -s, it's a negative times a negative, so it's going to be positive. And then I write it as 9s. Now, here's why. Even though the s is first visually, you never ever write, and I'm going to write it and then cross it out because you don't ever do this. So you don't want to do 288 plus S9. Okay, we never write the variable first. Don't do that. Okay, you always write when you have a number and a variable that go together, that are multiplied together, you always write the number or the constant first. Okay, constant's just a fancy term for number. You write the constant first, and then you write the variable. And then once they're actually linked together, 9s, then the term for that 9 is called a coefficient, because it's the term, it's the number that is attached to the algebraic term. So, and the reason I'm going over that is because here in a second, we're going to have to be identifying coefficients and constants and all that. Okay, sound good? I think we're good on this one. You don't even have to put this in your notes if you feel like you have a good grasp on it, but I just want to do a few here. Negative 18 times negative q. Again, a negative times a negative gives you a positive 18q. And then negative 18 times negative 5. Well, you've got a negative times a negative, so you know your answer is going to be positive, and it's 90. And again, because you have a q and a non-q, you can't combine them, so then that simply becomes your answer. Okay? Pretty good on 4-1. I think with the little bit, we've already kind of introduced it with the jump start. I feel like this was not too bad. Okay. All right. Go ahead and skip down a couple lines and go to 4-2. And I want you to be very diligent to take good notes on these first couple. And here's why. The instructions look a little intimidating. Identify terms, like terms, coefficients, and constants in each expression. Okay. That is the directions that are going to be on the first section of your homework when we hand it out here in a second. So I'm going to show you the way I want you to do it, which is pretty easy. I think it makes it a lot easier. Okay. So the first thing we're going to do, and I color coded this, the first thing we're going to do is we're going to identify, and I'm going to kind of combine term and like term together so you don't have to write it twice. So I want you to put a T colon under each problem, and you're going to write all of your terms. And I'll tell you here in a second what the terms are. So you've got terms, coefficients, and constants. Those are the three things that we're going to be identifying in this top section. And these are the abbreviations that you can use. All right. So if you need it, I can write it up here. T is for terms. CF is for coefficients. And I'll tell you what all these are here in just a second. And CT is for constants. Okay, those are the abbreviations that you're going to use to answer the top section of your homework. So your homework's going to look just like this. Identify the terms, like terms, coefficients, and constants in each expression. So we're going to look at expression number 1 here. And I've got T colon. Now I'm going to list all the terms. Terms are anything that has a variable. That's what the term is. So if I look in my number 1 example here, my terms are the 6, whoops, let me color code this. My terms are the 6y and the y. So 6y, comma, separate each one because you're doing a list here. 6y and y, those are my terms. Anything with a variable is a term. Next, I want to identify the coefficient. The coefficient is simply the number that is attached to the variable. So you kind of split it out here. So 6 is one coefficient. And this next one, every variable has a coefficient. What's my coefficient here?
1.
Yeah, it's a 1. You just got to know it's there, but it's a 1. So for every term in purple, you're going to have a coefficient, and it's just simply the number that's in front of your variable. Now, the constant is anything that's just a number. So -4 is my only constant in this problem. So the top section of your homework, this is what your answers are going to look like. Terms listed, coefficients listed, constants listed, and you can use the abbreviations. Yes?
Why would 6 not be a constant?
Let me circle it in red. This right here, because it's attached to a y. Yep. Because it's attached to a y, it makes that a coefficient. Okay. All right. So let's look at number 2. First thing I'm going to list is all my terms, which is everything that has a variable. So I have 8u, 2u, and negative 3u. So under terms, I'm going to list 8u, 2u, and negative 3u. For my coefficient, I'm simply going to pull the number from in front of each one of those u's. So an 8, a 2, and a negative 3 are my coefficients. Now, what do I have left? What's my constant? Do I have any here? So you just simply write the word none. Because in this particular problem, I don't have any constants because I don't have any numbers that aren't attached to a variable. Okay. Let's do number 4. And if you don't want to put this one in your notes, you don't have to. You've got a couple of good examples. So if you just want to, do it together and watch. Our first thing is we're going to list our terms. And here our terms are negative 21w and 3w. So I'm just going and finding everything that has a variable. So negative 21w and 3w. Next, I'm going to list my coefficients. Well, that's just pulling the negative 21 and the 3 off my terms. And then last, I'm going to list my constants. I forgot my F for coefficient, didn't I? Yeah, let me put the F there. There we go. My constants here are 5 and negative 1. So a 5 and a negative 1. So that's how I would answer number 4 on the top half of your homework. I'm listing my terms, I'm listing my coefficients, and I'm listing my constants. Now, I do want you to put this next one down in your notes, and there's a reason. I tried to use abbreviations to kind of make this shorter, and I combine terms and like terms because there's no sense in you listing the term and then the like term. You just would be writing it twice. But there are a few problems where you have a couple of different terms. So I want to show you how to do this. So the terms in number 5 are everything with a variable. Okay. And they all have a variable. Notice some are A's and some are B's. So rather than listing everything twice, just write 2 lines of terms. So in your first line of terms, you're going to have your 8a and your negative 3a. So 8a and negative 3a. Okay, those are the terms that all have A's. So they're like. Then I want you to go in and on your second term, right, your second line of terms, you're still listing terms, but now you're going to list your B and your 4B. So your B and your 4B. Now, between these 2 lines, you've listed all of your terms and you've grouped them together by like terms. So you're good there. Now we can go to coefficient. The coefficient is going to be the letter or the number in front of all 4 of these. So the 8 from the 8a, the negative 3 from the negative 3a. What's my coefficient in front of that B? It's a 1. So 1 is one of my coefficients. And then 4 is my next coefficient. So I should have the same number of coefficients as I do terms because every term has a coefficient. And then last, I go and I look for constants. Well, again, in this one, I have none. All right, so you're going to list your terms. And you guys don't have to do this one. I'm just going to do it really quickly just to do another example. Don't worry about putting this in your notes. My first thing is I'm going to look for my first kind of term. Well, looking at my terms here, I have H's and G's. So my first line is going to be my H's. So negative 12H. Then I'm going to go on my next line of terms, and I've got my plus 5G and my negative G. So 5G and negative G. Now I'm going to list my coefficients. Well, that's every number in front of all my terms. So negative 12, 5, and negative 1. And then last, I'm going to list my constants. And that's right here, my plus 8. So my 8 is my constant. And again, right, this right here are all your terms, but I just broke them out into like terms so that they're grouped together. Okay? And you're going to have to know how to do that in our next one. All right, so let's go down to the very last part of 4-2, and let's kind of put all of this together with 4-1 and 4-2. Notice the directions here say simplify each expression. So that means combine all your like terms, get everything. Remember the pyramid I told you when we did this earlier in the year? When you're simplifying an expression, you're simply starting out with a long expression and you're kind of upside down pyramiding it, getting it as simplified as you can get. All right. So it means combining as much as we can combine. Well, we know we have to have like terms to combine. And I like to do this when I took my college algebra class, like I marked up my questions like this. I went through my problem and I found all my like terms. So I've got a negative 8q and a 5q, and I'm going to underline them. And now I'm going to simplify all my q's. So if I have negative 8 plus 5, what's negative 8 plus 5? Somebody tell me. Negative 3. Because the 8's higher, so I take the sign of the 8. So negative 3q. Now notice it's kind of like saying negative 8 apples plus 5 apples is negative 3 apples. You don't write q plus q or anything like that. You just keep the q's because you're just adding like terms. So negative 8q plus 5q is negative 3q. I don't have any other variables, so I don't have to worry about that. Then the last thing I do is I find my constant. So I have plus 6 minus 3, which is plus 3. Can I combine my negative 3q and my plus 3? Are they like terms? One has a q, one doesn't, so that's my answer. I can't get any more combined or simplified than that because I cannot add or subtract my 3 and my negative 3 because one has a q and one doesn't. Cats and dogs here, okay? All right, number 8 is not really a challenge one, but something kind of weird happens here, so I want to talk about it. First of all, what's in front of my first H? A 1. Got to know that because it's not just nothing, it's a 1. So I'm going to go through and I'm going to underline all my H's. So I've got 1H, 5H, and negative 6H. So 1H plus 5H is like saying 1 apple plus 5 apples is 6 apples, right? 6 apples minus 6 apples, or 6H minus 6H is what? 0. They go away. Your H's all cancel each other out. Now, the long math of this, and you do not have to write this when you answer the problem, but if you have 1H and 5H and negative 6H, that all is 0H. Well, 0 times H does what to the H? 0 times anything is what? 0. So that's why it all cancels out to 0. Okay. And then you've just got left minus 3. And then of course, 0 minus 3 is just minus 3. Now you do not have to do this right here, or even this right here. If you show the work of 1H plus 5H is 6H, and then 6H minus 6H, right? They just cancel each other out. You're left with your answer is negative 3. That right there really is all the work you have to show. You don't need to do this whole 0H thing. I just showed you that once to show you the math behind why the H goes away. You don't have to actually put that math on your paper every time, okay? All right, now let's lump it all in with distribution and combining like terms. So we're going to do this problem number 14 here. We're lumping everything we know how to do all into one problem. So first things first is anytime you see parentheses, you got to get rid of them first, okay? So I'm going to distribute 4 times y, which is 4y. Then I'm going to take 4 times negative 3, which is negative 12. And then I'm just going to write plus 9 minus 3y, because I didn't do anything with those yet, okay? All I've done right now is I've distributed to get rid of my parentheses. Now I'm ready to find like terms and combine them. Well, I've got 4y and negative 3y. What's 4 minus 3? 1, so 1y, okay? Now I'm going to combine my constants. I've got negative 12 and positive 9, which is what? Negative 3. Can I combine these two? Nope. So there's my final answer. So distribute, combine like terms. Those are the 2 steps that you're going to need for this. And again, you do not have to write this example in your notes. I just want to do one here. Where's the distribute one? All right, here's a good one to do because it looks kind of weird here. What am I distributing into my parentheses? Nope. What's touching the parentheses? -2. So this right here, this whole thing right here is what I'm distributing. So that B hanging out at the front, I haven't done anything with it yet. I'm just going to drop it down. Now I take -2 times B and I get -2B. And then I take -2 times -2, which is +4. Okay, there's my distribution stage. Now my combined like terms, I have a 1B and a -2B, which is what? -1B. And then my +4 is my only constant, so it just drops down and there's my answer. So distribute whatever's touching the parentheses, then combine like terms. Okay, and if you have something that you don't use in the distribution stage, just drop it down. Like here, I'm not going to work it, but I would drop down my 9. I would drop down my -t, and then I would distribute my -3. So that would be -3t, -3 times +3 is +9. And now when I combine -t and -3t, I have -4t, and I have +9 and +9 for +18. Sound good? All right. Real quick, I'm going to say this for the recording, and then I'll tell you guys again when you actually have the paper in front of you. For 4-1, at the top, you only need to do 1, 5, 9, 11, 12, and 13. On the bottom half of 4-1, you only need to do that section all the way to the left. So 17, 21, 25, 29, 33, 37, 41, and 45. The whole rest of the paper you don't do. For 4-2, it's odds only. Okay, email me if you have any questions.